to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans. We're Lisa and Sarah, professional astrologers, here to bring you a monthly forecast based on a lunation chart, which lunation charts are powerful predictive tools. We look at the new moon each month, and we'll be doing a mundane forecast looking at events for the country as a whole, people, leadership, and we'll be exploring the Uranian dials, the 90-degree dial, and hopefully giving you a little something, some insight, and some focus for the month ahead.
Yeah, so basically what we're using is just another layer on top of the transits that you guys probably usually interact with as far as month ahead astrology forecasts go. And these new moon charts, like Sarah said, are a predictive tool in order to look at the month ahead from one new moon to the next. And we finally settled into a regular new moon to new moon schedule. The first podcast that we did was an eclipse chart, which takes us about 6 months into the future. So now we kind of get to settle in and go month to month and also reflect on how both the new moon chart as well as the Aries ingress chart that we did a little bit ago, how they all tie together and are starting to weave together. So yeah, welcome to this journey. Thank you for showing up, and let's go. I'll put the chart up. All right, so here we are. Do you want to start us off, Sarah?
Sure. Well, the first thing I noticed when looking at this chart, we know that when we do these mundane forecasts, the ascendant in the first house represents the people within our country. And the first thing I saw was this square from Neptune to the ascendant at that anaretic or critical degree. And gosh, Neptune, I feel like, my first thoughts were just really how vulnerable we are in many ways, how sensitive and impressionable we are to what's happening in our environment, what's happening within the collective. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this, Lisa? This Neptune.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we could probably talk a whole hour just about Neptune at the 29th degree, which we kind of spoke about earlier. But one of the things that came to mind, especially with some of the other elements of this chart that we'll get into a little bit deeper, is that it's just reflecting on Neptune's journey through Pisces. And I brought this up to Sarah earlier, and I also, I think, put this in my monthly forecast, which is just how we're at this point with Neptune being in Pisces for so long, that we feel very divided, but the lines, we don't know how to draw the lines. Like the lines feel very nebulous and unclear. And it feels like we're vulnerable, like you said, because of the nebulousness, because we don't know where the line in the sand is, because we don't know where the information is actually coming from. We have so much internet and AI and what's real and what's not, and what's valid information and what's not. And we see a lot still in this chart having to do with information as well, which kind of brings us to the next point. Would you like to, well, actually, I guess we could get there in a moment, but did you want to move to Jupiter?
Yes, so the ruler of the first house is Jupiter, which we see at 25 degrees Taurus in the fifth house, in the fifth house of children, and conjunct Uranus. And some of this harkens back to, I think, some of the concerns we had about children in the Aries ingress chart for the year, as well as just highlighting some of the overall instability that's happening this year and some of the turbulence, the lack of knowing. And we see that it's conjunct the sun and moon. And since we use the sun as a moon and moon as a way to look at the people, the leadership, and this month ahead, it just sort of reiterates, we're not done yet. We're not done with Uranus. That Jupiter is kind of magnifying the the instability, some of the anxieties that we're feeling.
Hmm. Yeah, and this Jupiter, like the fifth house overall is a very positive place for a planet to be. It's very fertile. It's suggesting that we take a chance, that we really put ourselves out there and in the sense of um individuality, and we see that reinforced with Uranus there as well, like revolution, individuality. Who are we as a people? And there seems to be some redefining of that, which makes sense, harkening back to the Neptune, where we kind of have this blank slate because it's all messy and and we don't know where the lines are. But I thought what was also interesting about this Jupiter's position, which represents the people in this chart, is that it's conjunct the fixed star Algol, which is known as the demon star. And I think that when we corroborate the symbolism in this chart, it really signifies that people are kind of going a little bit crazy. There's a lot of unhinged energy this month that may not know exactly what direction it's going in. And there's so much in this chart that's pointing towards a lot of action, and but maybe not always with a clear direction. We do have a nice Saturn is in this chart providing some stabilization, but I don't know if it's really enough uh, to tame and give a clear path to the energies that we're seeing.
Yeah, which is almost like as you said with Neptune, this lack of boundaries and this sort of confusion and lack of clarity, coupled with this kind of frenetic energy that Uranus brings. And if we look at the IC and see that Mercury, Chiron are sitting there in an
Yeah.
exact conjunction on the IC, and Mercury is the universal significator of the mind, communication, thought processes. And so that it does speak to some kind of wound in terms of that, I think, in terms of our mental outlook
Mhm.
um, and is part of that wounding around this kind of, well, like you said, part of the confusion around information and not having safe containers to hold us,
Mhm.
but also just the Uranus bringing in the turbulence of the mind, the restlessness, the anxiety, the instability. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, part of me was thinking about this with this being Taurus season. Can we somehow find our medicine in that? You know, we have this beautiful Venus and Taurus. Can we find our medicine somewhat in slowing down and finding stillness and coming home to just some of the our human pleasures?
Yeah, the comforts, the soft things, the yummy foods, the sensual interactions and that sort of thing. Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. I mean, and also just sticking with that Mercury for a second at the bottom of the chart as well. If Mercury can also signify young people, youth, children, and we see that also being really illustrated through so much action in the fifth house of children, of youth. And when we look at what's going on in the world today and where the headlines are, there's a lot going on in universities with the youth of our country up in arms and really working to create change and revolution within that environment. And when we switch the lens again for that same Mercury, we see that it's also the ruler of the ninth house of higher education. So there's something happening for sure at the base of this month, rooted in where it feels like there's just deep change waiting to happen. And it's going to be exciting for sure.
It's almost like some of these topics happening in the world at large within the legal system in those ninth house
Mhm.
places, as
Yes,
well as the
too.
seventh house, international affairs, issues
Yep.
of war and peace. it's all hitting us in a much more personal way. It's like coming into our homes, and it's a
Yes.
matter of stress and anxiety for us, I think, since we
Mm-hmm.
see that Mercury is also the ruler of the sixth house.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's something here that really speaks to these issues taking on another level of gravity within our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think that that was another thing high on my list as far as what this Mercury represents is the legal system as well. And I think that once we get to the dial, we'll start to kind of round out in some ways what these significators are pointing towards as well.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of the legal system is showing up in really pronounced ways, with what's going on with um, abortion, the legality of abortion and women's rights, with what's
Mhm.
going on in terms of, Lisa, you had mentioned in an earlier conversation we had about, Epstein. You'd sent me some information about Epstein potentially getting, no,
No,
Weinstein,
Weinstein.
yeah, getting let off. And then with Trump's cases, of which at this point I've lost track of how many there are. Um, but yeah, can we trust the legal system to
Yes.
be to bring justice?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it's huge because we're slowly moving deeper and deeper into election season. And with the eclipse chart, we saw that the ninth house was very highlighted, which is the legal system as well as universities. So we're really seeing when you watch the news every day to some degree, I just glance at it quickly, but those are the things that tend to be really highlighted as what's happening with the legal system and what's happening in these universities right now. So it's really interesting.
Yeah,
Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up I mean, of course, there's always a million things that we could talk about with each of these charts, but
I mean, I do think it's interesting that this Mercury Chiron conjunction was in the ninth house
mhm.
for the last lunar return. And so what was the topic? Actually, it was in the 10th house. Um, so what was the topic of the leadership? Again, it's just coming into the more personal spaces, hitting us on the ground, hitting us within our homes, affecting how life plays out in the day to day.
Mhm.
Which I just wanted to mention that because when we get to the dials, we'll see Mercury show up again and again.
Yes, we will. Absolutely. Okay, so let's switch over to the dial. And okay.
So there we have the pointer on the sun moon midpoint representing the month ahead. And what do we see? Oh, we see it lands on node Chronos. And so the node in Uranian astrology really speaks to the way we're connecting as a people, our intimate connections and relationships. And Chronos brings in the leadership. So again, we see here that what's going on in the world out large, out with the leadership, with um, the ideology as a whole, is starting to infiltrate our relationships and how we get along as people. And I was telling you, Lisa, about a friend of mine recently who was talking about how challenging civil discourse is right now, to be able to have conversations with people and take the time to really get into the depth and to be able to have differences of opinions without things getting completely blown up. And I think that's going to continue because, like you said, we have Algol conjunct the people in the chart this year, and we see these themes of cultural tides reiterated again and again through the leadership, through Chronos, through I think Apollon shows up in some pictures.
Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely this sense. Um, Actually, I think I'll move it forward to the next point we were going to look at, and then so the next one is Jupiter here,
Mm.
and like you said, here we have the new moon, the sun and the moon connecting with Admetos, and which brings in kind of a a focus, a narrowing in, bringing out the raw materials of what we're looking at, and almost creates, in a way, pressure around the environment. But it's the pointers on Jupiter, so it has to do with our beliefs and what our wider view is and where our optimism lies. So it's almost like our the optimism that we're working from which we worked through this style, and we're not going to bring them all up because it would take a lot of time and probably bore you guys. But the overall picture is that there's this optimism, these deep beliefs, these convictions that the people are holding at this time, and it's just in the ether, and it's coming up against restriction and a no, basically.
Yeah, because we see, it's not in this picture, but we do see Saturn, Mercury contacts. And so there's
Mhm.
something about the way we're expressing ourselves or the way we're thinking um, that does feel like it comes with burdens or challenges. Um, One iteration of this too is just, Lisa, you had talked about earlier the young people. And Mercury is a universal significator of young people. And so even in this picture, Mercury ascendant, we see that young people may take a bigger role on the stage within our
Mhm.
environment, within the civil discourse. And I think that's definitely going to come up with the women's rights issues that are.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And that was something that also, when we, does it come up? I don't think in any of the combinations that we looked at here, but there is definitely some indications of women's rights, abortions rights, reproductive rights that has a lot of basically the juice of reproduction coming up against a stalwart uh, boundaries of government and the no. And not that I astrology doesn't necessarily take a perspective on one side or the other. It's mostly just looking at it from a general side of reproductive rights are coming up against the law, up against people who have a different opinion. And doesn't matter which side you land on. It's just illustrating that that's going to be something that's going to be coming up.
Mhm. Which, in the Aries ingress chart, I think that spoke
Mm-hmm.
pretty optimistically in terms of women's voices being heard this year.
Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
there's some level of empowerment. And the combination that we saw with the Venus, what was it connected to? Um, Reminds me.
is in this chart or the Aries ingress?
No, it was in another combination that we were looking at here. But
The
it was
Cupido?
the Zeus, the Venus Zeus,
Yeah.
which is one of the most fertile combinations as far as astrology goes, Uranian astrology specifically. And that was, to me, seemed very positive for women's reproductive rights. And it looks like there's a fight, but it is in this chart where that could be heightened as well. Part of the revolutionary movement that we're seeing coming forward. And then and that really harkens back to the fifth house as well from the traditional chart, which is about children and reproduction, which is also fifth house. All
So
right.
could you speak to just a little bit more about that dichotomy between what feels really positive in this chart with this lunar cycle and some of the challenges that we'll face because of the Jupiter Uranus?
Yeah, I mean, on its face, Jupiter Uranus is very optimistic. It's ready to break through whatever obstacles are out there. And historically, Jupiter Uranus times have brought about great change in our society, whether it's something that we realize is happening at the moment, like the protests happening, or if it's some seed that was been planted, like Steve Jobs created Apple during a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction or alignment. But it was in his garage, so we didn't know it was happening. And then Apple has consistently changed alongside Jupiter-Uranus times. So there's so much going on with the Jupiter Uranus that it's so palpable, and it's going to continue to be palpable this month. The downside is that it's really disorienting, and it's jolting, and it can put us in places that are uncomfortable. And I think that that's also part of the transition that we're going through with both Pluto changing signs and also Neptune's getting ready to change signs. So we've got a lot of instability, a lot of change happening everywhere we look. I think that the upside is that there's change happening, and the downside is that there's change happening.
Mhm.
And one of the other things, as far as this month goes, transit wise, is especially towards the end of the month, we have a really beautiful alignment that points towards compassion and love and optimism, beautiful art, people coming together for the higher good of things. And we see that even coming through in the dial in different ways as well, which is that people really have these very strong convictions, and and there's real grounding behind it, and that's what's propelling people forward, is this conviction. And we saw that as well in the eclipse chart with that ninth house focus. It's what do you believe? And
Mhm.
uh I think that it's a great month to really sink into, what do you believe, and what do you want this dream to manifest as, when in this time of chaos and things churning and moving. Where do you stand, and what's your belief conviction, and can you hold compassion for others and still stay in your conviction, and how does that work?
Yeah. You know, hearing you speak reminds me of, at the inception of all the conjunctions, the beginning of every cycle, whether it's a new
Mm-hmm.
moon, whether it's the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, whether that it is a time of being in the void. It is a time of relative darkness. That we can't fully grasp what's coming or the form of it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it's okay to relax a little bit and into that. We don't have to have ultimate knowing.
Yes.
It's almost like we just kind of need to lean in. And high road Neptune is our ability to understand that which is universal, our
Mm-hmm.
connection to each other, our ability to have compassion, to use this lack of boundaries. I mean, ultimately, to move through the world with some level of love and kindness for those we inhabit it with.
Yeah.
And so I think in the midst of this kind of disruption, and I think this month, Lisa, we had noted that there aren't quite as many poignant pictures on the dials with this month. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this month is going to bring cataclysmic things. But at the same time, um, one thing we didn't talk about was the Pluto ascendant parallel or contraparallel. So
Yeah.
there is a lot that just speaks to being in the void, into some place of relative confusion and darkness. And at the same time, we don't see a lot of highly impactful, turbulent events per se. And so, how do we sort of navigate this little interim time of not knowing? And how
Mm-hmm.
do we lean into try to understand and discern our own values and beliefs in the context of all of that? Because we're building something new. The beginnings of these cycles, they're always something new is coming. And I think there's real capacity to participate in that in a really positive way, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's a really exciting time to be alive. I think it's important to remember that we were all born for this. Like we all came into this world. We were born at this time in order to participate in the big changes that are happening right now. I think that this month, like you said, I don't know that there's going to be anything necessarily cataclysmic, but I do think there's going to be I think there's going to be some surprises. I think that there's going to be a level of unhingedness. We see quite a few important points at 29 degrees in the chart, in the traditional chart, and that's a crisis point. And we see that sort of some symbology being emphasized in several ways, but it's not, but there's support in it as well. There's support, there's inspiration, there's the ability to move forward and continue to create collaboratively and on our own. So look for what's changing in your life, look for the sparks. Don't get pulled into the worldwide drama because there's going to be plenty of it. And figure out what you can work with within yourself, because it all starts with you. It all starts inside of you, and this same energy of excitement and change and growth can just as easily and more importantly take part inside of you instead of the drama on the wider world, in the wider world. So I think that's
Yeah.
where I would focus individually.
I think, with the Mercury Chiron conjunction being exact on the IC, it just makes me think about being a good steward of your own headspace, really, you
Absolutely.
know?
Yeah, and what can we learn when challenging stuff comes up? I mean, this is something that I've personally been kind of working through, is some of the old patterns of thoughts and challenges that come up in my mind, and just being like, okay, it's only coming up because there's something to learn from it. And really bringing that in. And I think that this Mercury Chiron is inviting us to sit in that discomfort and be curious about it, and not to fight it, just to grow from it and be okay with the fact that sometimes moments are hard and our brain can be tricky.
I heard Elizabeth Gilbert say something to the effect of that a creative life is a life where the driving force is curiosity over fear, that you make your decisions and
Mhm.
move forward with curiosity over fear. And there is something in this chart that speaks to that, with Pluto
Yes.
hitting the ascendant, with Neptune hitting the ascendant, and with this Jupiter Uranus in the sky. Can we let the curiosity override
Mm.
fear?
I love that. And just, I think we have Jupiter on the arrow here, but also towards the end of, like, middle end of this month, Jupiter is going to move into the sign of Gemini, which is curiosity at its finest. So I think it's perfect that you brought that in, because that is definitely part. I think the Taurus energy is part of the healing and part of the medicine, but I think also being curious as well about what's coming up and what's agitating and that sort of thing
Find
is.
your grounding this month. It's a prelude to Gemini
Yes.
season.
Yes.
And
And then put on your curiosity cap and have a good time.
yeah.
So,
Speaking of curiosity, Lisa and I would love to demonstrate a cold chart reading on this channel. And so if there's anyone who's interested in having us take a peek at your chart, we will give you concrete information about all the areas of your life. Um, Anything else to say about that, Lisa?
it's free. Just reach out to either Sarah or myself in whatever way is easiest for you. There's no specific way to do that. And yeah, we'd love to do that. And you get a free reading, and it's just a fun practice to play with astrology and witness its power.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
yes, you can find details about that and ways to contact us.
Yeah.
And we look forward to seeing you at the new moon next month.
Yeah, we'll see you next new moon. Have a happy moon month, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.